They called it the beast of the battlefield. Soldiers whispered its name before they even saw it. In the summer of 1943, German troops advancing through Eastern Europe suddenly began to retreat, not from artillery fire, but from a single tank they'd never faced before. Even Hitler demanded to know, what kind of monster have the Soviets built? This is the true story of how one machine turned fear into a weapon and changed the war forever. By 1943, the Eastern Front had become a graveyard of steel. Thousands of tanks lay twisted and burning across the frozen plains. The Wehrmacht had crushed everything in its path for 2 years. Their panzers were legendary, their tactics unstoppable. But something was changing. In the trenches and foxholes, German soldiers began sharing stories. Whispers at first, then urgent warnings passed from company to company. Reports spoke of a Soviet tank that bullets bounced off, that swallowed shells like pebbles. A machine that stood its ground when everything else retreated. Some said it was invincible. Others claimed it couldn't be real. Whole platoons refused to advance once they saw its silhouette on the horizon. It was the KV-1, the Kliment Voroshilov heavy tank. Named after a Soviet marshal, built like a fortress on tracks. But to the Germans facing it, it wasn't just a machine. It was a shadow on the horizon. A shape soldiers swore could not be human-made. One German officer wrote home, "We encountered something today that defies explanation. It absorbed our fire without flinching. My men are asking questions I cannot answer." Another letter, recovered decades later, read simply, "It stood in the open, firing without fear. We hit it 20 times. Nothing." The myth was born not in propaganda offices, but in the minds of terrified men who watched their weapons fail them. And myths, once born in war, spread faster than any tank could ever move. June 1941. Near Raseiniai, Lithuania. A single KV-1 tank blocked a critical crossroads. For an entire day, it held its position against elements of the 6th Panzer Division. German tanks surrounded it. Anti-tank guns fired from all sides. Shells struck its armor again and again, the sound like hammers on an anvil. The tank kept fighting. The ground shook as the invincible tank appeared through the smoke, its gun swinging methodically from target to target. German vehicles burned. Supply trucks exploded. Soldiers scattered into the forests. When German engineers finally destroyed it under cover of darkness, they found only 5 men inside. 5 men had stopped an entire division's advance for 24 hours. This was no myth. This was real. And the fear began to spread like wildfire through German ranks. For the first time, the Blitzkrieg hesitated. Commanders who had steamrolled through Poland and France now argued over strategy. Should they engage? Should they withdraw? Should they wait for air support? The psychological calculus had shifted. It wasn't about armor thickness or gun caliber anymore. It was about belief. Soldiers, returning from the front, carried stories that grew with each retelling. There are dozens of them, maybe hundreds. They're everywhere, and they can't be stopped. Radio intercepts captured desperate calls. Request immediate reinforcement. Enemy super heavy tank approaching. We cannot hold. In Berlin, even Hitler demanded answers. Intelligence officers scrambled to understand what secret weapon the Soviets had unleashed. Was it new armor? A revolutionary design? Had the Russians somehow leaped ahead in tank technology? The truth was simpler and more terrifying. The KV-1 wasn't particularly new. It had been in production since 1939. But the Germans had never faced it in large numbers, and when they finally did, its reputation had already poisoned their courage. Propaganda on both sides amplified the legend. Soviet posters showed the KV-1 as an unstoppable colossus. German warnings painted it as a mechanical demon. But here's what mattered most. It wasn't firepower that stopped the Wehrmacht. It was belief. Belief that nothing could kill that tank. By late 1943, the psychological damage was done. German tank crews approached every engagement with the question, what if it's one of those? That hesitation, that moment of doubt, that was the real weapon. But like all legends, this one wasn't built on pure truth. In reality, the KV-1 wasn't invincible. It was slow. It broke down frequently. Its transmission was notoriously unreliable. And yes, German guns could destroy it, and did, hundreds of times. By 1943, newer German tanks like the Tiger and Panther actually outclassed it in almost every way. But the legend had already taken on a life of its own. For Soviet soldiers, the KV-1 became something more than metal and treads. It was a symbol of hope, proof that they could stand against the German war machine, that David could face Goliath and win. When a KV-1 rolled into position, Soviet infantry rallied behind it. Not because it was invincible, but because they believed it was. For German troops, it became a nightmare they could never fully escape. Even after the war, veterans would lower their voices when speaking of it. The memory of helplessness, of watching their best weapons fail, of feeling, perhaps for the first time, that they could lose. This is the power of psychological warfare. In every war, fear is the most efficient weapon, and this tank proved it. You don't need to be invincible. You only need your enemy to believe you are. The KV-1 killed hundreds of German vehicles, but it terrified thousands of German soldiers. And terror is a force multiplier that no engineer can design. Long after the war ended, veterans still spoke of it with trembling respect. Russian veterans with pride, German veterans with the kind of quiet awe reserved for things that changed them forever. Not because of its armor thickness, not because of its gun, but because it reminded them what belief and fear can do. The tank itself was eventually replaced by better designs. The T-34 became the Soviet workhorse. The IS-2 became the new heavy. The KV-1 faded into history. But its legacy never did. It taught military strategists around the world that warfare isn't just fought with bullets and shells. It's fought with stories, with reputation, with the invisible weight of fear that settles on soldiers before they even see the enemy. In the end, the tank that terrified Hitler didn't just change the war. It changed the way men fought it, with their minds, their hearts, and their belief in what was possible. And sometimes, in the chaos of battle, belief matters more than steel.